Go.
Oh, we're recording.
We are recording now, yes.
Good.
Alright, so, Wild,
Oscar.
I have a question for you today. Who is history written by?
Oh, God. Historians, mostly.
Besides that. Who do the historians write for?
Do you want the answer that's been true for most of the history? Or do you want the answer that's true now?
Which one do you want to give right now?
Well, the answer that's true now is historians themselves.
Right.
Because nobody fucking pays attention to them.
Right, it's fair cop.
And throughout the majority of history has been much more of a propaganda thing than anything else.
Right. So is the statement history is written by the victors accurate?
No.
Okay.
Because victors aren't the only people who produce propaganda.
It's fair cop. Fair cop.
I would say that to say that history is written by the elites is accurate.
Okay. So my basic, like, the fundamentals of that question of is history written by the victors, for me it's a concept of the victor of what? Are they the winners of the war? Are they the victors of war, politics, social change? Like, there's many ways to win something and to conquer something. Like, let's say
many different kinds of struggle.
There's many kinds of different struggle. Like the victors of the civil rights movement, say, technically, theoretically, they won and got civil rights. Theoretically, we're gonna pretend because that's the common thought process. But that brings up the good question. The common thought is that they won the civil rights movement, right? They got civil rights. That's the common thought because that's how history has recorded it to us. But is that history accurate? And if it isn't, but if we still hold the concept of history being written by the victors to be true, which, I'm going to for now, despite your objections at the beginning, who actually won the civil rights movement then?
I would say that capitalism won.
Alright. Is capitalism just going to be end-all answer to everything?
When I say capitalism, I mean the present structure of social, political, and economic power. Okay. I don't just mean, capitalism is critiqued by Marx.
Okay.
The current social structure adjusted just enough to absorb the energy generated during the civil rights movement and separate the elites created by the civil rights movement from the commoners created by the civil rights movement.
Okay.
That is, they lifted up, black activists of a certain stripe in order to recoup the energy of struggle against the structure into itself.
Okay.
The essential character of the current social, political, economic structure is one of taking any movement against it, splitting it, and using and retaking the energy of struggle.
Okay, cool. So, if that being the case, if capitalism did indeed write theoretically they won the structure, and thus they get to write the narrative that the civil rights movement was a success and everyone has civil rights, and yet we can now look around at our current culture, and we're noticing more and more that may not have been nearly as true as they wanted us to believe, right?
Yeah,
we can both agree on that concept.
Yeah,
civil rights. Don't get me wrong. Good strides forward. Didn't magically solve racism. Like, basically the history books write it does when you learn in high school.
Yes.
Racism was solved at the civil rights movement with MLK. Right. But we know that's not true anymore. And that's because opposing histories exist. Or is it not so much an opposing history so much as opposing evidence can come forth that we can now look at? if we were to try, because there are people who have written histories of the civil rights movement outside of like now when I go to research the civil rights movement, I find plenty of people talking about how it wasn't actually a success, and reiterating basically its failures rather than its pure successes.
This is why I don't like the idea of history written by the victor, because history is also written by losers. And it's a cultural thing. When the civil rights movement ended, quote unquote, with the civil rights legislation under Johnson? Or was it Kennedy?
I think it was Johnson.
Okay. When that ended with the CRA, some people gained power.
Right.
And other people didn't lose power, but they lost solidarity.
Right.
And those two people wrote two different narratives.
Okay.
And the people who gained power were taken up by the majority culture as the mainstream narrative.
So would it be more accurate to say, rather than history is written by the victors, history is disseminated by the victors?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that'd be more fair way to put it.
Or at least initially disseminated by the
initially, because especially nowadays in the modern age of in the information age, all things are accessible. Information itself is a prized thing.
Yeah.
We pay historians to do nothing but learn to write history and research history for history's own sake.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any backwards goal to it as much anymore. So, it's still for the matter of propaganda most of the time. But I'm sitting here writing a history paper about, medieval embroidery to be read by me and my professor and literally no one else. So, history for history's sake is happening right now.
Yeah.
But the history that gets disseminated to the people is typically disseminated by the victors of a certain whatever movement it is.
Yeah.
To basically teach the narrative that they're the victors.
Yeah.
No matter what the truth of the instance may be.
Well, the truth is that they're the victors, but the victors, in particularly the case of the civil rights movement, aren't the same as the people who struggled.
Right.
Because, some African Americans definitely did win. But the establishment also won.
Right.
Because the establishment remained intact.
Yes. Hold on. So, for what group gets a victory when the establishment collapses?
The strugglers.
The strugglers, right? So there can be no victor for the strugglers while the overall system is intact.
Yeah, there's no ultimate victory without revolution.
Right.
And revolutions can be fast and revolutions can be slow. But as long as the power structure that people struggle against remains intact.
Even in the case of the strugglers potentially becoming the people that have the power in the current structure, the structure continues to exist because now that they're the ones in power, a different group of strugglers now has to exist.
And also, not everybody who struggled gets to join the power structure.
It's true. Theoretically.
Part of the deal of becoming part of this power structure is that you have to cut off solidarity with the less acceptable members of the struggle.
True. So, take for instance unionizing. The great struggle when unions were trying to become a thing and everyone was trying to actually make unions legal and unionize. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, as many people as could be hoped, potentially succeeded. Workers unionized all over the nation in every trade there was. So in that case, theoretically, the people that left out of that at the time, not thinking about modern days where, so many people aren't unionized. By the way, fast food restaurant workers, unionize. Just heads up, do that. Please.
Well, they are.
They should be, and they should be doing it more.
Yeah.
No matter what job you have, unionize. But, going back, history-wise, theoretically, basically, everyone succeeded but they proved unionization was okay, it was a good thing, they made it legal, they let it happen. The people left out of that power structure, because you gotta admit, getting all the struggling workers to be able to suddenly unite and become a power into themselves is a pretty good victory for the strugglers. And probably helped, the most amount of people become powerful. Would you say the people left out of that power struggle and who are now still struggling would be, say, the unemployed?
Yes, and also, African Americans and other non-whites, because
right. Who were,
the
left
American
out.
Union movement was primarily white.
Yeah, because all things in American history
are primarily white.
Are indeed primarily white. That's a fair cop.
And that's why one of the primary reasons, in my opinion, that the status of unions has regressed, because the unemployed are the reserve army of labor, which the establishment leverages against workers to coerce them.
Right.
So without the cooperation between the workers and the unemployed, then as long as there is no cooperation between the unemployed and workers, then the establishment can continue to wield that weapon.
Right.
So it's only when workers show solidarity towards the unemployed, and vice versa, that power dynamic disappears.
Right. Okay. So you almost poked at something that I was interested if you were going to poke it or not. So I'm going to poke at it instead, just because it's a fun nonsense thought. The regression. So the unionization movement was primarily white because most of America's history is primarily white. America was built on the backs of lots of other races and people mixing together. America's history is not mainly white. America's victories of the social struggles that we're talking about have primarily been white.
The accepted
history is that of white people succeeding and getting what they wanted in the first place, such as, the Chinese not getting to testify in courts against, any crimes that were committed against them. That's a victory for the whites. The unionization of all the white workers, excluding the blacks. Are you suggesting that the degradation of unions nowadays is somewhat caused by the lessening of the amount of white people in America?
No.
So you're saying white genocide is not in fact happening?
No, the reason it has...
Because I feel like that is definitely a narrative that some people on certain sides of the aisle are trumpeting. It's the concept that the unions are dying, and these things are dying because all the non-whites are coming in and not being part of the new social structure, and thus taking up more power and becoming more strugglers than there are winners, thus fucking up the system.
Yeah. So here's the thing.
Right. Okay.
The unionization movement triumphed and failed when white workers decided, you know what, it's enough to get us the right to be employed. Let's stop caring about people of color and the unemployed.
Right.
We will take the bargain of we will implicitly accept white supremacy in return for rights for ourselves.
I mean, that's always been the white argument. Historically, whites would much rather fight to make sure that, let's say military contracting, because that's another field that's a good segment of the example of this. When it came to military production, white people they fought incredibly hard, explicitly at that point, though in the unionization movement it was somewhat more hidden, to make sure that they're the only ones that got to keep those jobs. because black people take the jobs. So that's the specific them maintaining their control and their power to make sure that they don't become any of the strugglers.
Yes. It's not exclusively racial, though. If you take a look at the status of the LGBT rights movement right now, you will notice that immediately after the Obergefell decision...
Was what that was?
Oh, that was the Supreme Court decision that struck down all laws banning gay marriage.
Okay.
Banning same-sex marriage.
You really would think that would have assimilated into more of the common culture and name like Roe versus Wade has amongst our community.
Give it 10 years.
Hey, that's a fair pop.
When that happened, you will notice there was a pretty significant decline in anti-gay activism.
Right.
Like, it wasn't immediate, and there's still plenty of it.
Right.
But the government in particular stopped pushing that stuff. And instead the target shifted to trans people.
Right.
And this is an example of what I'm talking about. When the power structure said, okay, fine, we will make this concession. And in return for this concession, you have to join us against them.
It's okay, so in that case, in that specific instance, just looking at it from the other end of them, could it be that the anti-gay marriage protesters didn't die out because they no longer wanted to be, they weren't being pushed by anything, but so much so more because the pro-gay marriage people also stopped coming out in force to fight for it since they had it now. So there needed to be no counter-movement against them. And the reason why the anti-trans movement came about in its place was because the gay community was like, well, now we no longer need to protest for gay. We no longer need to fight for gay marriage because we have that. Now we won't stop fighting for trans people, and the powers that be noticed that, and thus is it more of an instance of the power structure being a counterattack against the attacks from the LGBT?
You may have a point there, and I see what you're saying. But what I'm talking about is looking at it from the power structure's point of view.
Right, and I'm trying to play the other. I'm trying to look at it the other way.
The Obergefell decision was a concession on the part of the power structure to try and bribe gays and lesbians, and break them off from the LGBT rights movement.
Right.
Or at least pacify them, so that they would stop standing in solidarity with trans people and non-binary people, etc.
See, I think that's putting more forethought into... I think that's giving the power structure as we have it more credit than I think it's due to it. I don't disagree that it's definitely a technique they can use. My issue is the organizational structure that would be required, the level of cognizance on the behalf of the power system that be.
I'm not saying this is something that was conspiratorially organized.
Right.
That's just how the structure of power works,
and how its basic functions do their thing is by doing that. Okay.
It's not a tactic. It's just the natural progression of liberal democracy, really.
Right.
The essential characteristic of liberal democracy has been to expand rights and franchise slowly, onerously, and every single time it's another fucking civil war.
Right. Given concessions when you reach the breaking point again, and then you move on.
Yeah, when the alternative becomes revolution, then the power structure breaks.
Right.
Or bends, rather.
Bends. Right.
And the thing is that this is a never-ending cycle. Because there will always be another minority.
Right. Well, yeah. Eventually, you get down to... Yeah.
I mean...
It's pretty much always... Yeah, that's a fair call. There will always be another minority. it's an interesting... It's always interesting to observe the different... When you put it in that light, and looking back on history in that light, of the power structure continuously just absorbing just enough of the strugglers to be able to put the other strugglers down, and to keep the other strugglers down until those strugglers... I mean, isn't it just... Okay, can the argument be made for the idea that it's like the old joke between a mathematician and an engineer? There's a woman 10 feet away from them, and someone says, you can only move halfway to them at the rate of moving halfway to them at a time. The mathematician says, that's impossible, you'll never reach her, what's the point? The engineer says, you'll get close enough for it to not matter. Can it be an instance of that idea? It's like, sure, every time it expands, it absorbs more of the strugglers, and sure, there's more strugglers, but isn't it a smaller group of strugglers each time?
No. Because the thing is that the power structure that exists today is hierarchical.
Right.
There is no way for it not to have a narrower top than bottom. And so, as franchises expanded, you create new categories that themselves knock people down to the bottom.
Yeah. Now, I'm gonna argue the concept that it automatically knocks people down to the bottom and creates new strugglers that way. I'm rather I'm arguing the concept of, sure, it's always going to be narrower at the top than it is at the bottom, just hierarchy-wise. Can't, theoretically, the top also the whole thing just keep expanding? Like, the top gets bigger in proportion to how much bigger the bottom gets. Like, it's not like the top has to stay the same size. The top can also get bigger as the bottom keeps getting bigger. So sure, it stays a pyramid, but like the top of the pyramid also gets to be a bigger chunk each time.
Well, if you expand, then nothing has changed. It's like the
Well,
inflation
no,
of the universe.
you're continuously absorbing more of the strugglers, and there's less and less of the strugglers outside of the triangle.
Well, no, because the strugglers are in the triangle. They're just at the bottom.
So why can't we just, like, keep moving it down? Expanding it over the strugglers?
Because you can't have a pyramid without a base.
You can make the base small.
Then it's not a pyramid anymore.
Isn't it potential to make the bottom base of it so like successful and okay with their lives that they're no longer actually struggling to exist, and they're not struggling anymore? They're just the base of this hierarchy pyramid. You're arguing that the base of this pyramid has to be people struggling. I'm arguing that why do they have to be struggling at the base of the pyramid?
If there isn't struggle, then it's not a hierarchy. Struggle is the defining characteristic of hierarchy. It's a method of power relation. The people above exercise power over the people below, and the people below give allegiance to the people above in return for not being kicked down the pyramid.
Okay, so there always has to be something worse down at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah. Because otherwise the pyramid collapses.
Right.
And you have a revolution.
Because eventually you get to the... my train of thought there was, the concept was, you can just keep knocking it down, like, except if eventually, you're right, eventually there does need to be that struggling group on the bottom.
You have to build your pyramid on something, and that something is always going to be the threat of...
Okay, so what's the solution to a triangle? What if we want to get rid of the pyramid, what shape do we need to build instead?
Just a box, dude.
But a box will still have people on top of the other people, won't it?
Not if the box is only one person tall.
I don't know why I'm thinking of a food pyramid here. Got to get that one out of myself. Okay, you're right. If the box is one category tall, and everyone just fits into that one box.
Yeah. Or we just explode everything into a bunch of tiny little boxes.
Now, see, that sounds like anarchy, and we will not have any of that on this show, sir. Don't human beings fundamentally crave structure?
Structure's not the same as hierarchy.
True. I could go with the bullshit hierarchy argument of it exists in nature and stuff too, but so does socialism, so...
Neither of them really exist in nature. There's social structures in nature, for sure.
Yeah.
But they don't fit the hierarchy definition. They don't really fit the socialism.
What, don't the lobsters fit that hierarchy definition?
Not really.
I remember there's some analogy with the lobsters.
Because...
I'm trying to remember what the hell it was.
Well, that's the thing. It's a metaphor.
It's the metaphor.
It's an analogy.
Okay.
Which means that it is... Well,
it's considered a lobster is the thing that's going on.
It is a useful argument for people who argue that hierarchy should be the way we organize things.
Right.
But it is not a piece of evidence that hierarchy is natural.
Okay, so, on the fundamental level, if we ignore the... So, on the concept that the box isn't really possible, because fundamentally humans are assholes and terrible people, isn't the hierarchical system where the majority of the people are not struggling better? And a good system just in general?
I don't... there is no hierarchy without struggle, though.
Yeah, you create the base of people, but the base of the pyramid, the mass of the base of the pyramid does not equal the entire mass of the rest of the pyramid. So fewer people are struggling than are not struggling. So just from just a moralistic view
that just means that
from the utilitarian viewpoint, isn't it better that with a hierarchy
the thing is that even
encouraging people...
Even in a system where everyone's economic needs were taken care of, if you have a hierarchy, there will be struggle. It may not be struggle for your life, but there will be struggle for influence. There will be struggle for... Who knows what's, fucking weird things will come up with socially and politically. Even if you take the economic out of the equation, there will still be struggle.
There's always, at the very least, even if you take care of everything else, there's still the struggle to be higher on the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Even if there is no genuine difference between the strugglers and the people at the top of the hierarchy, fundamentally we'll want to be at the top
difference.
At the hierarchy.
The genuine difference is that the people on the top can tell the people on the bottom what to do.
It's fair cop.
And people have lots of different reasons for seeking the power to tell other people what to do. But when that power is available, it will always be sought.
Okay. It's fair cop. Again, I'm going to be honest here. Most of this so far I've been trying to argue... I'm trying to argue the other sides. I'm trying to play the devil's advocate. I'm doing a bad job of it because I'm not the devil, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm having some trouble here. Again, hello. I've clearly not spent enough time listening to Ben Shapiro.
Please don't.
I'm not going into it. We're not dealing with it.
If you want some genuinely intelligent advocates of hierarchy, you should look into Younger or what's his name? Carl Schmitt.
Carl Schmitt?
Yeah, he was a judge during the Weimar Republic and penned basically a bunch of philosophical papers that sort of not excuse or justify, but explain fascism.
Okay.
And it's kind of horrifying, honestly, because it is an explanation of one of the most inhuman social systems the world has ever known. But it does give a lot of insight. And it is rational, even if its fundamental values are anti-humanist.
Right. Okay. So yes, go look them up for, apparently a fun read.
Not really a fun read.
Go look them up for a horrific read.
Yeah.
But you'll learn a lot, which is kind of what we're all about here. Now since we've been on the subject of minorities, transiently, as we've been passing through this. Now, So I want to bring up a concept that's been floating around in my head and on my PC for a while there. There's two different types of minorities that exist. There's the minorities by statistics. Statistically, there are less Chinese people in America than there are white people, right? Statistically.
Yeah.
And then there's the minorities that exist because of how history is written and how history has written itself. So an example of that would be, historically, women are a minority.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, historically, in fact, women have made up half, if not more than half, of the human population on Earth. But historically, women have kind of been counted as the minority. Now, my question for you basically is, why? Why? So history gets written theoretically by the victors.
Uh-huh.
The real question here is, why have the victors for so long been the non-majority of the world? Historically here, we've got, say, theoretically, like, between men and women, just to use them as an example. This might not be the best example. There's better ones. You could use different countries being bigger than other ones. But, at the end of the day, history is mostly written women out of itself. Like, again, there's the whole dissemination versus actually written.
Yeah.
And when you go back through history, you can actually find plenty of writings about women, amazing women and what they've done.
And by.
Indeed, exactly. But, again, disseminated to the population, it's all been by men.
Yeah.
And so is this just a cultural holdover from the time when men could just fight in wars thus they got to be in charge of everything? Except throughout history, we've also had warrior queens, and warrior tribes of women that have existed. But just, like, historically, men have written the histories, and women have been the minority of history. Despite the statistical, equal level.
There's a lot of different answers to that, in my opinion. To a certain extent, it's even sort of a chicken and egg question.
Right.
In that,
how far back do you go?
History is determined by the victors, but the victors are determined by history.
Right.
So the people who disseminate the history
are the victors.
Right.
So hold on. So if we go
because
by that
the
concept,
ones who are left standing to do it.
Right. But in the case of a world where the losers are no longer left dead on the field, but rather defeated by, the culture of the history, but they're still there around to write their histories. Does who is the victor now just become who becomes better at disseminating the information that they have won?
To a certain extent, I think so, because
that's
how you establish authority. That's how you establish power.
You tell people, I'm in charge, and people listen to you because you're saying you're in charge, and you're the one saying it the loudest compared to everyone else.
And by loudest, you mean both in the sense of most audibly and also with most force.
Right, exactly. So does that, in our modern age of mass media and, social media, the internet's ability to disseminate someone's thoughts and ideas so quickly in an entire movement, all that, has the concept of being able to win historically and become the victor fundamentally changed into an entirely new race to become the victor?
I don't think so.
Nope.
I think what has happened instead is that it has accelerated.
Okay.
That the churn of history has stopped being on the scale of millennia or centuries or decades or years. It's minutes.
Okay. Right. I would agree with that. I mean, it's been accelerating for a long time. I mean, we've got the women's movement. How long did it take women to get the vote? And then once women got the vote, compared to how long it took women to get the vote, how long did it take black people to get the vote? And compared to that, so let's say, how long did it take gay marriage to become legalized? And then how long is it going to take for trans people to get rights? And those are already there's already laws being passed for that concept right now. And each time it's been a faster and faster and shorter fight. And even on a smaller scale of just the small social victories of who's in the right on each specific issue. Is it like, okay, so let's take the Kavanaugh hearing real quick, which was a huge social media battle, which was mostly just, I mean, even if we ignore the politics that were involved in the actual fundamental victories, if we're looking at just the cultural victories that each side was trying to achieve, the left was trying to achieve a cultural victory in the concept of proving that he's saying that he is one for sure, and that he doesn't deserve to be on the court, and the right was trying to play off and trying to win the culture war, saying these women are all liars and he's a good person. That culture war happened within the space of like basically a week and a half to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And like, who do you think won that one? I mean, we have to take ourselves out of where we're at, because we potentially might not be a good representative.
Well, I mean,
because I know plenty of people who still heavily argue the concept that these women are all just liars.
The thing is, Kavanaugh gained power.
It's true. Which relates back to the concept, which I guess goes back, if we want to follow that trend, if we're following this argument of who gets the power based on who yells they're the victor the loudest, the greatest poster boy for that, and I was trying to kind of avoid politics today, but that's basically impossible with us, probably side major and history major here, we can go back to, Trump, who's, again, this has been said by a lot of different people, and a lot of different people have passed this idea, is that Trump fundamentally, whether he knows it or not, has this innate ability to win on the social media, that kind of idea. He just automatically wins because he's the one that comes out and just automatically says, I am the victor, the loudest and the strongest and everywhere. And again, that kind of thing is why Kavanaugh got to gain the actual structural systematic power.
Part of the problem is that I don't know that it's necessarily possible to apply the language or the theoretical framework of interclass struggle to things like the Kavanaugh hearing or the Trump election. Because what those fundamentally were, in my opinion, were basically disagreements about which clique of elites held primacy.
Right. But what is an election other than a social battle?
It's a social battle, but it's not a social battle between classes.
I mean,
sometimes
it potentially can be. That's depending on your candidate and your level of play.
But the 2016 election really wasn't.
No. Well, I mean, hold on. Potentially, you could look at the
2016
general election. I was about to say, the primary election, I feel very much can be looked at as an argument between classes.
The struggle between classes in the primary election was only in the Democratic primary.
That is true. I will actually also point out, however, the concept that the general election could be seen as one as well, because Trump got massive amounts of his support. The concept of his support base came from a specific class of people. For the most, in common thought, most people accept there's a specific class of people that he represented the concept of the non-elite taking power to them.
That's his narrative.
That's the narrative.
But it's not accurate.
Right.
Because while, maybe about a third of his base may be people who are economically disadvantaged, they're not socially disadvantaged.
Right.
This is where we get into problems of intersectionality and overlapping realms of power. Trump voters, by and large, are white.
Right. Okay.
In fact, almost exclusively.
There's a couple of, outliers.
Yeah. White women, white men. And the battle between Hillary supporters and Trump supporters was honestly largely a white-dominated battle. Like, yes, plenty of people of color and minorities supported Hillary.
Right.
But it's not because they wanted her. Or because they wanted the Democratic Party. It was just pure, like, self-preservation.
Right.
Like, it was just...
But, so, in that, right, moving away from that, because that's...
In fact, it is an example of the power structure capturing interclass struggle.
Right. For itself. And using that interstructure and using that struggle for its own means.
Both the Hillary campaign and the Trump campaign framed their campaigns as a form of class struggle. For Trump, it was economic elites versus economic strugglers, and for Hillary, it was social elites versus social strugglers.
Right.
But as it turns out,
that was all bullshit.
They were both economic and social elites.
Right.
Or representing the interests.
Representing the interests of some. Okay. So, if we take all that to be true, what happens if we just kill all the strugglers?
Well, then
does the pyramid collapse? Or does the pyramid finally win? Or do the class above the strugglers now become the new strugglers?
Yeah.
Okay.
The bottom tier of the pyramid collapses, but it is otherwise whole.
It is otherwise whole. The bottom rung now just becomes the new strugglers.
Yeah. Because the threat of annihilation is the ultimate threat of hierarchy.
Right.
It's, for someone who's middle class, the threat is keep your head down, do your job, fit in, or you will be lower class.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lower class, obey, keep your head down.
And somebody who may be middle class.
But the threat, that's the carrot.
That's the carrot.
The stick is, or you will be unemployed.
Right.
For the unemployed, it's, don't bother us, or we will kill you.
Right.
Or, don't bother us and we will allow you to live.
Right. It's not implicit, we'll murder you so much as it is, we'll allow you to continue to exist and live. Yeah. We'll continue to help keep you alive.
The threat of annihilation, of death, is the ultimate foundation of class power.
Right. So on the flip side of my last suggestion, what if we made everyone immortal? Then we go back to the concept of hierarchy of everything solved, except we still have hierarchy because someone wants to be able to order someone else around.
Yes, but without the threat of annihilation, then things become weird. Because while you can still do... Honestly, there's many forms of annihilation.
Right.
It's not necessarily physical death.
Right.
Maybe the form of annihilation that the hierarchy rests on is eternal torture.
Mm-hmm. Or eternal isolation.
Yeah. Which is torture.
Which is a form of torture.
For a human, that is torture.
For a human, is another form of torture, yes. That's a fair cop. Okay. That's a fun little thought experiment to prove. Just kind of try to prove the concept of the hierarchy is bad no matter what changes you make. A
suddenly immortal human race would become more brutal, I think, not less.
You think?
Yeah.
Probably. I don't know.
Because we would have to because to maintain the current power structure, we would have to invent something worse than death.
I personally think that if the human race suddenly all became immortal, the power structure would break. The hierarchy would... I just fundamentally feel like, at that point, too many things would shift suddenly that none of it all of a sudden matters.
Possibly.
And it would just break, crack, and collapse in on itself and turn to powder. And then we've got the amorphous floating blob that it doesn't take a shape anymore. Then we've got the anarchy we're looking for.
Well...
If you're immortal...
You wouldn't have anarchy anymore, you'd have anarchy. Lawlessness.
Yeah.
Rather than lack of hierarchy, you would have lack of
structure.
Yeah, at all. Any structure at all.
Right. Why do you need any structure at all?
Because people require structure in order to interact. True. Language is a form of structure. You structure your thoughts and then project them.
The basic morality concepts that we instinctively all hold.
Yeah.
Still is a form of structure of society. It's still a form of structure.
Yeah.
Like, even if you take it all the way back to the basic concepts of, if everyone's immortal, what's making them want to do anything or interact peacefully with anyone else? It's because, well, life is just better if you're interacting well with your neighbor.
Yeah.
And thus, the fundamental ideas that you take with you to make interacting with your neighbor a better experience for everyone, or mostly yourself, if we go with the purely self-centered human being, is fundamentally you are creating structure in your society in that way. So we can never live in a structureless society, because that's not society, to be fair.
Yeah.
Or we could all just become hermits that live 20 miles apart from each other and never interact, but, you know.
I mean, yeah, maybe, but...
Why would we want to?
That's the thing, it would require a fundamental reworking of humanity.
Right. And why would we ever want that? Well, great, right?
I would say that humans are noble, and that they are deeply flawed, but struggle despite them.
Okay.
That is to say, against our basest inclinations, we continue to do good.
Or at least we try. On that note, we're going to leave y'all for today. It's been a good day, good episode. Hope you all enjoyed it. Go look up Schmidt, was it?
Carl Schmidt.
Carl Schmidt, if you're really bored and hate your life.
I highly recommend Oliver Thorne, Philosophy Tube. Anybody who's listening to this has probably already watched his videos, but...
I mean, let's be probably. The whole 3 of them so far?
What? He has a whole bunch of videos.
No. Not his videos. Our listeners.
Oh, okay.
All 3 of our listeners.
Yes.
If we're making...
He has a section on political enemies, or a video on political enemies and political friends and violence, in which he talks about Schmidt. I don't remember exactly what the title of the video is, but it's good.
Cool. Well, if we're going to recommend YouTube videos and that we fucking love, I'm personally going to recommend Extra Credits History on YouTube. Go look them up. They're fucking amazing.
Okay. Yeah, they're all right.
They're fucking amazing, and I will fight anyone else that says so. Also, Overly Sarcastic Productions. At this point, I'm just plugging the best YouTube channels that exist.
CGP Guide.
There you go. Have a good day, everyone.
Wait.
Email. Oh, email. Yes, that is a good point. We now have an email. The email is thankyoufornotsmokingpod, that's P-O-D at the end of that, @gmail.com. Thankyoufornotsmokingpod @gmail.com. Email us anytime you feel like it.